Before I get started, I just wanted to mention that this episode is being brought to you by Anchor. This is the free podcasting platform. It allows you or anybody who's interested in starting up a podcast. They've got everything you need to get started. They've got transitions and music, recording software, and it's all absolutely free. If you go check out anchor.fm or download the Anchor app if you're interested, they will help you get started. Hello, and welcome to episode 25 of The 10th Man. If you are watching this right now, then you are watching the first recording of my podcast, first video recording, that is. And if you're listening right now, then you are listening to me recording my first video of this podcast. So thank you for listening, wherever you're listening. I decided I wanted to try to broaden my reach a little bit and get involved in the video aspect of podcasting as well, and hoping that I can expand my reach here on YouTube. So thank you for tuning in once again. If you follow me on Instagram, earlier today I did a very short live video on the COVID situation. And again, if you've been listening to the episodes of the show up until now, I've been discussing COVID at length. Most of my episodes have, in some way or another, involved the COVID-19 pandemic. And I wanted to just follow up on the things that I was talking about earlier today in regards to the quarantining and the lifting of some of the guidelines in terms of social distancing and certain businesses opening up. I had talked about this in a couple episodes prior about why I have concerns with opening up some of these businesses and lifting the quarantine too early. So I won't get into that too much, but what I wanted to talk about today largely concerns values that we have as people. And what kind of perpetuated my thought process on this today was a Facebook post that I saw on Facebook, and it was regarding the Contra Costa County numbers of infection rates and deaths of COVID-19. And my interest in this was based off of the fact that the person who posted it was posting it with the assertion that this is why we need to lift the quarantine, because look how well we're doing. In the numbers he gave, it was 1,066 people in Contra Costa that have that have been infected with COVID-19, and of those, 32 have died. And that represents a 3% rate of death. But the person who posted it was just looking at they said 894 people were fully recovered. So he was looking at that from an optimistic perspective. And when I questioned him on the fact of 3% of them dying, and don't you see an issue with that? Doesn't that seem like a high death rate? He basically pointed to the entire population of Contra Costa County, which exceeds 1 million people, and in which case it's a 0.002% rate of death. And so that got us into this discussion about how do you measure, what's the barometer of when you're talking about a death rate of anything. And my contention was that I think it's flawed thinking to apply the entire population in a situation where there's a specific cause of death. And so I made I made an analogy with lung cancer and smoking. You have the number was like 0.004% of the entire population of the country will die of lung cancer this year. But put another way, 0.5% of everybody that smokes will get lung cancer this year. And 0.5% is actually a sixth of the rate of COVID, as was the case in Contra Costa, where it's 3% are dying. But obviously, we would all agree that smoking is dangerous and potentially fatal, and you shouldn't do it. So the point there being, I think that 3% is pretty serious, and I don't think that it's quite accurate to measure the death rate against the entire population. So the second part of that discussion, after getting into that part of it, was why, if the death rate is so low, which is his contention being that the death rate is so low, therefore we need to lift the restrictions. But I asked him, why is the death rate so low? And he couldn't give me an answer initially. He kind of was claiming that he's not an expert in the field. And so I said, well, it's because of the quarantines. The quarantines is why it's been so low. And eventually he came to where he agreed with me on that. He agreed that, yeah, it is because the quarantines is, and he acknowledged that lifting the quarantines would cause more infections to happen, and therefore more deaths, in the addition to the thousands of people that are dying every day right now. But at the end of it all, and this was kind of where the conversation ended, he just said, it's inevitable. It's just going to happen. And so that discussion and the line of thinking that got there really got me to thinking about just our values and our ideals, and the fact that for me, that wasn't good enough. That it's inevitable and we have to go back to work. We have to lift the quarantines, but we're just going to accept the fact that people are going to die and more people are going to die as a result. So this led to, for me, just kind of thinking more in the abstract about, again, how we deal with death and what we value in our society. So I was trying to figure out, what is it? What is it with people who want to just accept that some people are going to die? And yes, the majority of the people are elderly. They're more susceptible to getting sick and dying of the virus. So I'm trying to think, what's the value? It's about being anti-authority, maybe? But then who are the people that we're saying that people like Eric Gardner and Philando Castile and Walter Scott, that had they simply just complied with police orders, that they would still be alive today? So that didn't quite seem right. So maybe it's about exercising their constitutional rights, their rights to freedom of expression, and just all of the rights of the Constitution that they feel are being violated right now. But then I think, who were the ones who were calling Colin Kaepernick and people like him just asshole pieces of shit, bad, un-American, non-patriots who should show respect to the flag? And in fact, if you're going to be anti-big government, anti-federal authority, what's the fascination with the flag anyway? I don't really get that. It's this nationalism that seems sort of like a pick and choosy kind of nationalism. I don't know if you remember back in 2008, 2009, this was around the time when the Tea Party was rising in America shortly after Barack Obama was elected president. There were a lot of people who protested in complaint, and this was allegedly because of Obamacare, that Barack Obama wanted to kill your grandparents. And there was this idea that going around that there was going to be forced euthanasia to curb the population or something like that. And now you've got people who seem to think that we should just let the virus run its course and take out whatever old people that it's going to take out along the way so that we can develop herd immunity. And so I just find it interesting how it seems like conservatives want to rely on the sanctity of life when it's convenient for them. When it comes to abortion, sure. When it comes to better gun control in the wake of horrific tragedies, maybe not so much. When it comes to disrespecting the American flag, don't you dare disrespect the memories of the soldiers who died fighting for this country. But when it comes to the meaning behind the kneeling, the people who are kneeling and why, the fact of black people being executed by police, the sanctity of life just seems to go out the window, at least for the black people that are being executed by the police. Speaking of dying for this country, we're getting close to a 9/11 every day right now with the death rates. If you're old enough to remember 9/11, you remember, it was a very monumental day. It was a life-changing moment for everybody in this country, shifted all of our perspectives, and the coverage of the media dominated 9/11 for months. We went to war for it. We went to two wars, actually, one of which had absolutely nothing to even do with 9/11. But the deaths from that day, just that one day of 9/11, led to the Patriot Act, the far overreaching, big government, liberal, really, in a sense, in terms of the federal government oversight of just violating of privacy of American citizens, all in the name of protection from terrorism. So again, this is the sanctity of life coming into play when it seems to be convenient. But then when it comes to the government providing health care for citizens, well, again, not so much. And in much the same way now, it seems that we're willing to risk or even accept a certain number of deaths so that people don't have to give up too much of themselves in the process. So I guess what I'm getting at here is that it seems that there are people who pick and choose the things that they'll take a stand for when they will be willing to give up certain freedoms or, in the name of preserving life. But then there's this pick and choosiness to it where I don't see what the consistency is. The only common denominator that I'm seeing in all of this is it's about controlling, or at least disregarding the weak and the sick, the poor, people who can't afford health insurance, the black men who get murdered on camera and their executions still they're not brought to justice. Women being put in terrible situations and having to make just agonizingly difficult decisions with their bodies, being called murderers and whores, usually by old white dudes who never have to make a decision like that, never have to be put in that situation. And then now here, the elderly, the ones who are most susceptible to dying of COVID, hey, collateral damage, right? They're already old. They're going to die soon anyway. You have people lining the streets, getting in police's faces, voicing their hatred for the government because they've got a problem with wearing a small piece of cloth over their face for the good of others. So I guess I'm feeling kind of disappointed right now in just the sentiment and how people are choosing to look at this situation. Obviously it would be great if we had a vaccine. Then we probably wouldn't have to go to these lengths, but just the fact of the matter is we don't have a vaccine, and it's spreading like wildfire, and people are dying every day. And again, just getting back to just a question of what we value and what's the real motive behind people's anger here. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not convinced that it's got anything to do with people's lives or caring about people's lives. Seems to me, if you're gonna, if you're gonna say that it's not critical because they're older, then it's hard for me to believe that you really believe in the sanctity of life. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm curious. I really like to turn these videos into a dialogue and hear people's opinion. And honestly, if you disagree with me, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And let's start a dialogue. Thanks a lot for listening to my first episode here, or my first YouTube episode anyway. If you're interested, if you're watching this and this is the first time that you've heard of the 10th Man podcast, go check out anchor.fm/10th Man. You can also find me on Spotify, Breaker, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. There's a whole bunch of different outlets. But if you go to anchor.fm/10th Man, you'll find my homepage. You can check out my prior episodes that are all on audio file. If I can figure out how to convert the audio files to video, I would love to get those uploaded onto YouTube as well. But I don't really want to pay to do that if I can help it. So I'm kind of looking into other means of doing that, but still having them look quasi decent. Thanks a lot for tuning in here. I'm excited to see how this venture with trying to get into YouTube videos turns out. I will be talking again with you very soon. Please take care of yourself and each other, and remember, don't be afraid to question the consensus.